Hey guys, welcome back to another rambling video by me. I'm sure you can already tell by the timestamp that this video is going to be a bit longer than some of my other ones, but that is because I am going to be going into a little bit of detail about full-length albums as opposed to just songs, so it's going to be a bit long. So I wanted to do this video a couple months ago as more of like an introduction to my music taste, because I think that somebody's top favorite albums of all time kind of says a lot about their personality. So I wanted to do it back then, but I never got around to doing it, and I came up with some other top ideas, and I didn't want my whole channel to be like top 10 this, top 10 that. So I decided to give it a little break. And recently I ended up discovering an album that I had never listened to fully before and really liking it. So I've been binging on it. So I kind of decided that instead of telling people that just don't really care about my type of music facts about an album that they're never going to listen to on their own, that I would make videos talking about them to you guys, because why not? So they're not really going to be in the style of a review or anything. This list is not going to have any videos done on any of these albums because they're my favorites. So you can just assume that I binge on them very frequently. I'm keeping this list to one album per artist, well, per band, per name, whatever you want to call it. It's just the albums that I have listened to so many times, start to finish. There's hardly any songs on them that I would skip, especially when I'm just letting it play through and treating it like it's a concept album, like it's telling me a story. These are albums that have either got me through a lot of things or have just really stuck with me for some reason. And I am going to go in order chronologically of how they came out rather than ranking them, because that would just make it even harder. It was pretty hard as it is coming up with 10 alone, but having to put them in order preference would be like torture, so I am just doing it in the order that they came out. We are going to start with one of the oldest bands that I listen to, and that's what's next.
Nothing left to do but run, let's run. Let's run.
Oh, The Doors. They are basically the Beatles to me. Waiting for the Sun came out in 1968 and is the third studio album by The Doors, but the first and only album of theirs to ever go number one. I had a really hard time actually choosing between this and The Soft Parade, but I think that I like Waiting for the Sun better, mainly for the overall sound effect. The Soft Parade is a lot more extravagant. It has a lot of horns and string sections. Waiting for the Sun is just as experimental as any other album that The Doors have done, but it has a lighter and more playful carnival-esque sound overall to it. If you didn't think that Jim Morrison's lyrics could get any darker or weirder than The End, then you have to listen to the song Not to Touch the Earth. This is a song that was kind of derived from one of Jim's poems, The Celebration of the Lizard. At the end is when he infamously says, "I am the Lizard King, I can do anything." This song is one of my favorite Doors songs, and I interpret it almost as a follow-up to Break On Through, which is obviously him trying to persuade people to take mind-altering drugs to make you see the unknown and the unconscious a little bit more. And this is him saying, "Run with me." So what I always looked at it as is him telling you to take acid and go on an acid trip with him. Can you imagine the experience that would be? Jim was like the first rock star that had that personality where he was always getting into trouble and always causing controversy, and I think that that's something that attracts me. And then you have to appreciate that Ray Manzarek was basically the bass player of the band. He would play bass with one hand and the melody on the piano, the organ, with his right. My favorite songs on the album, like I mentioned already, are Not to Touch the Earth, My Wild Love, and 5 to 1. It's hard not to have a classic like Dark Side of the Moon on your list. This is obviously a concept album, and after doing a little bit of research on it, some of the sources that I read said that it basically is supposed to be a story that touches on all of the different aspects of life that drive humans insane. Money, time, they drive us to the dark side. And if anybody is going to make Going Insane sound beautiful, it's going to be Pink Floyd. Take a look at Shine On You Crazy Diamond. The music is just remarkable, the messages are deep, the songs just flow together so smoothly. Even the songs that don't have any words in them still are so captivating. I mean, look at The Great Gig in the Sky with the wailing that is just done the entire time. There's nothing else with the song other than that, but it's just such a journey to listen to that it distracts you from the fact that there are no words. There's so many different sound effects on the album that it kind of makes you almost feel like you're going insane yourself. I mean, and they all play them at the same time at certain points. There's the cash registers, the clocks ticking, the creepy laughing, screaming. It is such a slow and soothing album for the most part, but it doesn't put you to sleep at all. My favorite songs off of the album are Breathe, Time, and Brain Damage.
She get crazy, woman get crazy, she can go.
This one's actually an interesting addition to my list, particularly because Van Halen is really not one of my favorite artists. It's funny because I actually think I picked up on my album binging habits from my dad. My dad really wasn't a huge Van Halen fan for a long time until about 10 to 13 years ago. Every single time I was in the car with my dad for the next couple of years, I heard Diver Down at least once. The album is literally only a little over a half hour long. I really had no choice but to fall in love with it. But other than the consistent exposure that I had to the album, there are plenty of other reasons why it has left such a big impact on me. First of all, it was on the album charts for 65 weeks, which says a lot. 5 out of the 12 tracks are actually covers, and 3 are just guitar intros or solos, whatever you want to call it. Van Halen takes covers to a whole new level. So it kind of makes you prefer their version over the original, for the most part at least. If you don't think that Eddie Van Halen is one of the best guitar players in the world and that Alex Van Halen is one of the best drummers in the world, you got something wrong with your hearing. They are a band that just loves to have fun, and there's really not a whole lot of lyrical complexity in a lot of Van Halen songs. But nonetheless, you have to love the music and appreciate it. There's so much energy. They're one of my favorite bands to listen to when I'm working out. I'm also not really huge on instrumentals, but Eddie puts so much emotion and passion into his guitar playing. My favorite songs on it are Secrets, Dancing in the Street, and Little Guitars.
I used to do a little, but a little wasn't doing, so the little got more and more. I just keep trying to get a little better, say a little better than before.
This is a rock staple. Guns N' Roses has been my all-time favorite band since I was a little kid, and while Appetite was not my introduction to the band, their greatest hits album was, but within a few months of getting their greatest hits album, my 10-year-old self wanted more. I got it for my birthday. I studied it 24/7 until I knew every single word, even to Anything Goes. Axl Rose was actually my first major crush, until I found out what he looked like at that time. In 2005 to 2006, he had the dreads and the handlebar mustache, so I kind of just repressed that image from my mind and pretended he still looked like what he did in 1987. The album is so imperative to classic rock and roll history in general because of all the history that came with it. They were playing up and down Sunset Boulevard for 2 years, taking advantage of every single A&R rep that wanted them on their label. They would get taken out to dinner, drinks. I mean, they were 5 guys living in one little loft. And as soon as the slightest bit of their freedom was going to be revoked because of any of the deals, the offer was off the table and they just kept playing. They were a household name of Hollywood. Every single song on the album has a unique story behind it. And you can argue that about a lot of songs, but a lot of songs coming out at that time, Nothing But a Good Time, Smoking in the Boys' Room, were just feel-good songs about sex, drugs, rock and roll, what it was like being a rock star. Welcome to the Jungle was about New York City. Out to Get Me was about Axl's run-ins with the police at his hometown all the time. Rocket Queen, there's a fun story behind that one. And I'm not saying that Appetite doesn't touch on sex, drugs, and rock and roll, but it does it in more of a common man way that a lot of young, angsty people were able to relate to more. So Guns N' Roses just became that band who had the sound, but also the depth that came with it. The album didn't even really take off until people discovered the B-side, which had Sweet Child of Mine on it, and other softer tracks like Think About You and Rocket Queen. If you Google what is the best-selling debut album of all time, it's still Appetite. That is the impact that that album had for that band. They turned them from playing the Roxy to stadiums within a couple of years. My favorite songs off of Appetite are Night Train, Sweet Child of Mine, and Rocket Queen.
I will walk with my hands
is really the first grunge music I listened to. When I was in middle school, my parents popped it in the CD player in the car on the way home. This was darker, and it was angry, but it was deeper than Guns N' Roses and anything else I had been listening to. And as soon as that first riff in Once broke out, I was like completely attentive. The album was huge, and there's not a song I would skip on it. It goes from being experimental to hard. You know, you have songs like Why Go, and then you have songs like Release that have completely different vibes. I probably only understand about 40% of the lyrics, but I still love singing along to it, even when I have to make up the words on my own.
Maybe he'll see a little better Saturdays.
And one of my favorite parts about the album is that Once opens with that same very slow, drummy chime that Release ends with. So it's like, almost like if you want to play it again, it just flows back into itself all over. My favorite tracks are Jeremy, Black, and Release.
Sitting here like what answers with X's in my eyes and drawing lines.
I know. How dare she put Badmotorfinger instead of Super Unknown? Super Unknown is a classic, don't get me wrong. It's phenomenal. All the really big songs and hits are on it. I first got introduced to Soundgarden when I was in high school. My dad showed me them on the radio and told me about Audioslave too. I went home and I got some Soundgarden songs from iTunes, got Telephantasm shortly after, and then was recommended to actually go and pick up Super Unknown. I fell in love with it, but I didn't really go too much deeper into Soundgarden's song catalog after that. Honestly, the past 11 months of my life have been a pretty consistent Chris Cornell song catalog binge. And I'm usually against that. Against, oh, you only really seemed to partake in interest in this artist after they passed. I was always a huge Chris Cornell fan. Huge. But Soundgarden specifically, I didn't really get really deep into their material until the past year. And I just think that Badmotorfinger really highlights and accentuates the ability of Chris Cornell in his vocals. The guitar and the drumming work is just absolutely insane. The whole thing is so energetic and aggressive and angry and raw as opposed to Super Unknown. I mean, listen to songs like Jesus Christ Pose and Drawing Flies. I think it's a little bit more complex than Super Unknown, and it goes a bit deeper. The first two songs in the album are Rusty Cage and Outshined. I mean, those were two of Soundgarden's first really big major songs. Johnny Cash covered Rusty Cage. That's awesome. My favorite songs on Badmotorfinger are Slaves and Bulldozers, Searching with My Good Eye Closed, which is actually like my favorite Soundgarden song, and Rooms 1,000 Years Wide. Dirt is probably the darkest, most depressing, and saddening, gloomy album that I listened to. Funny story, I was first exposed to Alice in Chains when I was in 5th grade. Them Bones was on Guitar Hero 2, and it freaked me out. I remember telling my friends, only depressed people would listen to this. Little did I know how much I was going to be relating to some of the material on this album over the next 10 years of my life. In high school, I was reunited with Alice in Chains. I heard Rooster come on, and I was like, who is this? And I ran to the screen, I saw that it said Alice in Chains. I laughed thinking about the fact that I was now enjoying music that myself 10 years prior, or 7, however many years prior, would have actually been very turned off by. So when you're 9 and 10, you're not going to go listening to this very dark and gloomy music. You want to listen to all the feel-good stuff, the Dr. Feelgood, even though that's about drugs too. By my senior year, I was driving out of student parking, blasting Junkhead, and getting some very strange looks from people. It's heavy. Lane Staley is one of the top male vocalists in my opinion in rock and roll. I absolutely love his voice. He goes from this very deep, low growling to screaming. And then Jerry Cantrell has all the obscure lyrics for the most part. Lane did write a lot more than most people are willing to admit, but Jerry wrote a lot of the lyrics, and then he has these chill-inducing dark guitar riffs to go along with it. It was definitely an album that made me feel less lonely at times that I did feel like I was all by myself. From depression to drug addiction to Vietnam to Andy Wood tribute. I mean, there's so many different topics covered. My favorite songs on the album are the obvious ones, but for very good reason. They are Down in a Hole, Rooster, and Wood. If there's any album that I love to blast when I'm so full of rage that I feel like I could kill somebody, it's the Battle of Los Angeles. Last semester, I worked at a law firm and I had to go to trial a couple of times, and every single time in court when they would say testify, I would just hear Zach De La Rocha screaming testify and then the rest of the band pounding behind him. This album is just an explosion of energy, and it's the soundtrack for people who are pissed off and are just sick of the world and everyone in its shit. I'm not even really into politics because I just would rather not associate with it, but this album makes me feel like I can go partake in a fucking coup d'etat or something like that. They're telling you not to support anyone and not to trust anyone. Zach De La Rocha is a phenomenal lyricist, MC, whatever you want to call him. My friends laugh at me when I call it rap. Look it up, it's fucking defined as rap metal. He has a really very distinct voice too. I really don't know what else to even say about this album other than that it's an absolute eruption, and I love blasting it, and it's as effective as having like 5 coffees in the morning. My favorite songs off it are Guerrilla Radio, Sleep Now in the Fire, and Maria. This is technically keeping it to one artist, even though it is a combination of Soundgarden and Rage Against the Machine. It's a supergroup and it has a different name, so it doesn't count. This album got me through some really tough shit in high school. Obviously, that's kind of the age when some of your mental wheels start getting a little bit off track. This album, it got me through relationship problems, family issues, isolation and loneliness issues, everything. It has the energy of Rage Against the Machine, but with the charm of Chris Cornell's voice, and I really just don't think it gets any better than that. So the story that I told about my dad introducing me to Soundgarden, he told me about Audioslave. I tended to relate a little bit more to Audioslave because I think a lot of Soundgarden stuff was still a little bit dark for somebody my age. I was like 15, 16 at the time. But Audioslave, everything was just very direct and in your face, and I related to a lot of it, and it really stuck with me. Audioslave is honestly one of the reasons that I listen to the majority of music that I listen to today. It's why I know The Pretty Reckless. It's why I know Alice in Chains. I Am the Highway actually means so much to me that I got it tattooed after... Looks crooked, it's not. After Chris Cornell passed away, literally less than a week later. Favorite songs are I Am the Highway, Like a Stone, Shadow on the Sun. This album to me isn't just a masterpiece, it feels like a gift. And I miss Chris every day with all my heart, and I owe a lot of who I am and the strength that I have now to the words that he sang on that album.
Don't you a goddamn thing they say.
This is something that I know is not going to be on a lot of people's lists. I honestly don't think that enough people have given The Pretty Reckless the credit that they deserve. They kind of just write them off because it is led by a former childhood actress. Yes, she was an actress in her childhood, but instead of becoming an Amanda Bynes or a Lindsay Lohan and going absolutely off the deep end and blaming her parents for putting her in the entertainment industry at such a young age and depriving her of a childhood and blaming all her life problems on that, she used her platform and the pedestal and the fame that she already had, and she went after what she really wanted to do. I admit, when I went to Rockville in 2015 and my roommate told me that we had to go see Cindy Lou Who's band, I laughed. I did. And then they came out on stage and they broke out into Follow Me Down, and I was in absolute shock. I got Going to Hell and I was hooked. Going to Hell it's hard, it's raw, it's dark, and it's stripped of all the production and the backing tracks that they had used previously because they wanted to capture their live sound. It took them years to put it out. It was pretty much done in 2012, and then Hurricane Sandy came and just wiped out their entire recording studio, all their equipment. They had to start from scratch. But she's living proof that you can do whatever you want if you're serious enough about it, and that the people who are criticizing you and are doubting you are not going to have any effect on your success. This album gave them 3 number ones. My favorite songs are Follow Me Down, House on a Hill, and Sweet Things. She can scream. And so to conclude, those are my top 10 favorite albums of all time. Let me know what you think of my selection and what your top 10 favorite are. Definitely stay tuned for the first current binge video that I'm gonna do. That's gonna be coming up probably next week. I already know what I'm gonna do it on because I'm already binging on the album. This isn't really gonna be like a series that's like consistent and it's once a week or once every 2 weeks. It's just gonna be literally once I have an album that I'm binging on that I wanna tell everybody about. If you've watched up to this point already, God bless your souls, and comment below and let me know what you guys think. Thanks. See ya.